lonely lumberjack, lived alone for 9 years, until a deaf bride was left tied to his fence post. Winter was easing its grip on the Bitterroot Mountains. Patches of snow melted beneath the first sunlight, and the wind moved gently through the pine trees. At the edge of his cabin, Jonas Holt stood still, watching the forest. 9 years had passed since the fire, since the world he loved turned to ash. But something in the air felt different today. Near the fence post, a girl slumped in a wedding dress soaked with mud and torn at the hem. Her wrists were bound with coarse rope, her face pale and bruised. She did not move, only shivered where the melting snow soaked through the fabric. Jonas stepped closer, axe in hand, and with a single stroke cut her free. He knelt in front of her. "You in trouble, miss?" She didn't respond. Her eyes, wide confused, met his, but no words followed. Jonas placed the axe aside and extended a hand. "If you can walk, let's get you out the cold." She hesitated, then allowed him to help her. As she rose, he noticed a damp scrap of paper clutched in her fist. Carefully, he unfolded it, scrawled in trembling ink, "For Jonas Holt only." No name, no explanation, just a warning, or a plea. Without another word, Jonas lifted her into his arms and carried her toward the cabin. Inside, he laid her beside the hearth and stoked the fading fire. He untied the rest of her bindings and wrapped her in blankets, adding his own coat over her shoulders. The warmth from the fire flickered across her skin, though she continued to stare at him in silence. He poured warm water and wrapped a slice of cheese in cloth, placing both beside her. She didn't touch them, but glanced at him with wary eyes. He scribbled on a piece of paper, "Do you need to speak? It is safe here." Her hand trembled as she touched the message, but she gave no answer. Jonas did not press. He closed the door, shutting out the wind, and stepped back outside. Wagon tracks led away from the cabin, ending abruptly at the tree line. Someone had driven her here, then left, vanished before the snow covered their trail. This wasn't an accident. She'd been left on purpose. Inside, she lay curled beneath the blankets, breathing evenly now, her body finally still. Jonas watched her quietly, fury simmering low in his chest, not at her, but at whoever thought she could be used this way. Someone had chosen his home, his name. But she wasn't bait anymore. He fed the fire again, then sat nearby, not as a rescuer, but as a witness. He didn't know her story, not yet, but he saw enough to make a silent vow. She would not be discarded again, and whoever had done this would soon regret, thinking the man in the woods had forgotten how to fight. Outside, the thaw continued. Inside, something had begun to warm, too. The narrow bedroom smelled faintly of lavender wood polish and old grief as morning sunlight filtered through dusty curtains. Jonas Holt stood by the door for a long moment, his rough hands curled into fists. This was the room he had not entered for 9 years, the room where he once laid a wife and child who never woke from the ashes of the fire that destroyed his life. Now, on that pale spring morning, it held another presence, a young woman breathing softly under a thin quilt. Her dark hair spilled across a pillow he had carefully replaced only hours ago. Jonas knelt and tucked the quilt around her defensively, then rose and moved to the small hearth where embers still glowed from the night's fire. He stacked fresh kindling with mannered precision, then fixed the kettle over the coals. He felt the weight of his own solitude pressing on him, but pushed it aside. Tonight, she had woken without screaming. That was enough. He exhaled slowly and left the room, lowering the door behind him. He laid a simple wool blanket on the floor by the fire and placed a folded shirt at its edge. He would not sleep well, if at all, but she would sleep warmly. Jonas sat on the floor at the foot of the quilt, his back against cold plank walls. His eyes shifted to the cracked mirror across the room. He brushed one arm over his forehead. He was tired. His heart still remembered the sting of loss. Even now it ached as if lit by flame. But nothing in him wanted to flee tonight. Not now. A breeze fluttered the edges of the curtain. The window was definitely broken. He rose and carried a small lantern to the sill, easing the glass open wider. The wind hungrily rushed in, and the curtains tossed like silent ghosts. The pale sky beyond flickered with the promise of early dawn. Jonas set down the lantern and stepped onto the narrow roof. Rainwater dripped from yesterday's thaw, and the tiles shifted with his weight. He traced each broken slate with mindful care, steadying loose pieces until they lay flat. A tight silence enveloped him, only the distant caw of a raven and the water's soft hiss to accompany his labor. At last he returned inside and crossed to the bed. The girl stirred, eyes blinking when they met his. He did not speak. Instead, he shook out a second blanket and spread it over the patch of quilt above her shoulders. She exhaled in sleep. Jonas touched her hand gently. The cold had left it. He then moved a small table into the corner, placing on it a tin cup of warm water and a slice of bread. He stretched her notice before stepping away again. Crossing to the window, he drew the curtain tightly, sealing the room from gusts and outside world. He returned at last to the quilt's foot and sat, knees drawn up. He watched her as the sky lightened. He could remember each flake of ash from that long-ago fire, each desperate breath. But here she lay in peace. Tonight, at least, she was not afraid. Not of the dark, not of the world. A rooster crowed beyond the cabin. Snow dripped slowly from pine branches near the window. He let each drop fall into silence. He closed his eyes, and in that quiet promise he felt something pull free inside him, a fragile thread of hope, like the first soft leaf of spring pushing up through frozen earth. When dawn arrived, he rose and brushed his coat with purposeful calm. No questions, no demands. He would build trust the only way he knew, by silent consistency. He stepped out into the chilly light, heading first to the barn to ready the day's work. But every few steps, his thoughts drifted back to the room and the woman sleeping within. In the still of that morning, winding through a forest waking from both winter and grief, Jonas made a decision, buried deep but sure. He would stay, and he would let her sleep tonight and all the nights to come without fear. Deep into the night, a hush had settled over the cabin like a soft blanket, every ember long extinguished, the logs cold and dark. Jonas Holt lay on the floor beside the hearth, eyes half closed, mind drifting like drifting snow. Then, unexpectedly, a clear, haunting melody cut through the silence. An exquisite, heart-wrenching song that rose as though carried by the wind itself. He froze, breath caught in his chest. Each note trembled with longing, with sorrow, with something fierce yet fragile. He rose to his feet, inching toward the door, between his sleeping corner and the kitchen beyond. With a gentle push, he opened the door into darkness lit only by moonlight through the small window. There she stood, Lena, her back to him, head tilted slightly upward as her voice filled the room. The quilt around her fell softly to the floor, revealing the simple dress stained with yesterday's dust. She sang of freedom, of wings and sky and the ache of forgetting how to fly. The words, though unfamiliar, carried powerful emotion, something pure and personal, yet universal in its sorrow. Jonas watched, torn between awe and a primal fear of intrusion. Lena had cradled herself in grief for so long. What right did he have to witness this fragile moment? He took a slow step forward, treading quietly over the floorboards that his life had grown accustomed to. When he cleared his throat softly, her song faltered, as though the melody itself had been startled into silence. Lena whipped around, eyes wide with terror. Her small frame trembled, arms instinctively wrapping themselves, as though shielding her throat from a blow. She tried to speak. A soft sound caught her throat and swallowed it. Her gaze darted to the open door frame, as if expecting the world to collapse in judgment at her exposed voice. Jonas cleared his voice again, but louder this time, to reassure, "Don't stop." It came out rough, unfamiliar even to him, but it was gentle and certain. His voice, the first she had heard in days, carried no judgment, just invitation, just a permission she hadn't dared to give herself. Lena's shoulders quivered in anguished relief. She nodded once, eyes still rimmed with panic, but she swallowed her fear and, on unsteady feet, began to sing again. It was not the same song she sang before. This one was quiet, tender, hesitant. It trembled in the cool night air like the first bird call of dawn, and every note, though faltering at times, reminded him of the woman she could be. Minutes later, the fire's glow had swallowed the moonlight. The last whispered note died in the air. Lena closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and walked softly out of the kitchen into the hallway. Jonas remained silent, allowing her the space to retreat. Soon the only sound was the soft creak of her shifting weight on the old floorboards, until the door closed behind her, closing out the music, the echoes, and possibly everything raw and hopeful. The next morning, when dawn slid through the windows, Lena was gone from the kitchen. On the rough wooden table lay a single slip of paper in delicate, careful handwriting. "Please don't tell anyone I can speak." Jonas picked it up slowly and studied the words. He walked to the mantel and laid the paper next to the faded oval photograph of his late wife, her eyes gentle, her smile soft in the black and white stillness. He thought of the nights he had spent with that photo, promising love and preserving memory, and now once again found himself guarding something fragile and precious. He placed a steady hand on the paper, smoothing its edges. For a moment the cabin was quiet again, but different, lighter, as though a single note in the darkness had broken open a place inside him, and inside her, that nothing else could reach. He folded the paper neatly and tucked it behind the photograph, fingers lingering over her name etched beneath the glass. He felt a fierce warmth rise in him, the kind that came from protecting something more than wood, stone, or fire. It came from protecting the unspoken, from believing in something so delicate it could be destroyed by a whisper, from holding a promise in the dark that he would not betray her trust. Jonas stepped outside into the brittle air. His breath formed clouds in the morning light. She had given him her voice, even if only for one song, and he would protect it with every silent moment he had left. Under the slanted beams of late afternoon sun, the town of Cold Hollow stirred with something unfamiliar, a whispering current of rumor and suspicion that spread faster than any wildfire. Jonas Holt walked through the square with his head lowered, chopping wood by the old mill, when the first whispers reached him. "They say he's keeping a mute woman in the woods. Is he dangerous, they wonder? He sent out some kind of license saying she's his wife." Jonas paused, axe half raised, and scanned the faces. This was Clyde Merrow's doing, the man who had caused the fire that took Jonas's wife. Jonah thought he had escaped that terror by disappearing to the forest, but now Clyde had found him again. He wiped sweat from his brow and carried on felling logs, but every swing felt heavy, like he was swinging through a thick web of accusation. That evening, Clyde appeared at the church steps where townsfolk gathered. He held a parchment in one hand and smirked. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced loudly, voice dripping with false concern, "Jonas Holt is not the tortured hermit you thought he was. He is a kidnapper." He held the parchment high. "Here's his marriage license, your mute woman from the woods, his secret bride. I would worry for your daughters if I were you." In the tense hush, a few gasps broke out. Jonas stood off, cutting more wood, uncertain how to explain. A bounty hunter, hired by Clyde, loomed in the shadows. By firelight, Clyde's gritted teeth sharpened. The next morning, when the frost was still on the grass, the girl, they whispered to call her the bride, was gone. Her side of the bed was folded neatly, the quilt tucked away. On the small nightstand, a single folded note awaited. "You were kind. That's dangerous here." Jonas found the note before sunrise. In the dim glow of dawn, reading those words against the wood grain, he felt the first sight of darkness again. He understood. Lena blamed herself. She thought his kindness endangered him. He rushed into the forest, the snow muffling his steps. At the edge of the clearing, he found her footprints, then sudden blankness. She had run away. He followed the path downhill. The wind carried her voice, or he thought it did, calling his name softly, just above the whisper of broken leaves. He reached the stream that skirted town and finally found her there, huddled, knees drawn up, shoulders shaking. Her eyes, red-rimmed, looked up at him. "I cannot keep you safe," she whispered, voice no longer silent. Jonas knelt before her, words careful. "It is not kindness I owe you. It is protection." Lena looked away, trembling. Tears glistened on her cheek. "I am a burden. I will cause you trouble." He closed the distance. "You are not a cause of trouble. You are someone I promised to shelter." She swallowed hard, gaze flicking to the far bank where axes waited by the mill. The world felt too loud. Jonas reached out gently, brushing snowflakes from her sleeve. He did not ask her why she fled. Instead, he said softly, "We leave together." Standing, he offered her his arm. After a moment, she took it. Their footprints headed upward, back toward home. That evening, he nailed a fresh board where the fence post had weathered. He stared at the grain for a long moment, and then carved 2 words, "Safe here." Inside the cabin, he set a lantern on the table and poured 2 mugs of tea. When she stood in the doorway, cold and hesitant, he nodded at the chair by the fire. "Sit," he said simply. She sank into the chair and accepted the tea. He watched her cradle the warm mug in her hands and then place it on the table. Outside, the moon rose low, lighting the roof where snow still numbered days of winter. Inside, Jonas closed the door and slid his axe behind the wall. His eyes found Lena's in the firelight, not as accusatory stares, but as silent pledges. He did not ask for words. He only asked her presence, and for now, she stayed. The courthouse in Cold Hollow was crowded that morning. Farmers, shopkeepers, curious neighbors, drawn by rumors of a kidnapping scandal. Clyde Marrow stood by the judge's bench, triumphant and smug, while a pair of stern-faced deputies held Lena at the center of the room. Her wrists were tied in front, her head bowed, hands trembling as she looked at no one. The heavy oak doors shut behind Jonas Holt with a soft thud that seemed to echo in his bones. He had come not to save face, but to protect her name. "Mr. Holt," the judge intoned with weary impatience, "you are accused of abducting this woman and concealing her in your cabin. Do you plead guilty or not guilty?" Jonas stepped forward, steady despite the murmurs around him. "Not guilty, Your Honor. I brought her home because she was left tied at my fence." He paused, letting the words land. A few men laughed. "You live up there with ghosts and embers." Clyde smirked and produced the marriage license. She married him. It is legal. I found it in his cabin. Heads turned. Judges frowned. No one asked Lena what she had to say. No one even looked at her when she tried to speak, a small sound trapped in her throat. Though not mute, her voice was buried under trauma, fear, and the stares of 1,000 people. Jonas moved toward her. Your Honor, I pledge to prove she is not his wife. The judge waved a dismissive hand. Enough talk, he said. We will see evidence. He gestured to Clyde. Present the certificate. Clyde read the document aloud. Marriage date, signatures forged. The law is clear. Lena pressed her lips together so hard they turned white. Her hands clenched, but she said nothing. The judge leaned back, expression hard. It seemed the gavel would fall to convict Jonas. Then the hush broke, soft at first, like wind over water. Lena inhaled. Her fingers danced over her throat for reassurance, aware of the watchful eyes. She closed her eyes, steadied her breath, then she began to sing. No cage for my wings, no lock on my soul. Though you hold me captive, you will not hold all. Her voice, crystalline and pure, rang into every corner of the courtroom. She rose to her full height, and each note grew stronger, carrying pride, sorrow, resilience. The melody breathed life into the forsaken corners of the old courtroom, like snow melting in spring. The audience gasped. Some pressed hands to their mouths. The judge's stern face crumpled. Even Clyde staggered back, eyes wide. The deputies lowered their rifles. Jonas felt his heart thunder in his chest. Lena's last note trailed off into silence, hanging like a declaration in the stale air. She never spoke a word, yet her song spoke volumes. She owned her voice, her story, her freedom. The judge's eyes glistened. He pounded his gavel softly, twice. This is no abduction. This girl, he said gently, has been stolen from justice. I find Mr. Holt not guilty, and this license null and void. His voice trembled. Clerk, seal the document. Release her. A wave of quiet reverence filled the room. Jonas moved forward to lift the bonds from Lena's wrists. She looked up, tears shining in her eyes. He offered his arm. She accepted, stepping close to him, and together they walked out of the courtroom. Outside, the sun glinted off fresh snow. Clyde's departure was silent. He slipped away into the crowd, defeated. Jonas and Lena emerged side by side. No cheer greeted them, only soft murmurs of relief and respect. A few people whispered, "Thank you. Welcome home. We are sorry." Jonas stood before his cabin later that evening as Lena sat on the porch swing. He handed her a small wooden carved feather, a gift he had whittled that morning. She took it, touched it to her heart, then laid it gently atop the swing's armrest. Without speaking, she leaned her head on his shoulder. In the twilight hush over Cold Hollow, neither needed words. The song had told their story, and that melody would echo in the hearts of those who heard it for nights to come. The cell was damp and cold, the wooden walls heavy with the stench of despair. Jonas Holt sat on the hard bench, back straight, hands folded in his lap, as deputies clanged shut the iron bars behind him. He stared ahead into emptiness and found it difficult to breathe. With every tick of the clock, doubt pressed at his chest. Had he done enough to protect her? Had she paid too high a price? Outside at dawn, beyond the gray stones of the jailhouse, Lena came quietly. She carried a small wooden stool, one he'd crafted for her months before, and placed it just beyond the bars at the foot of the cell door. Her dark scarves swept the ground in soft arcs as she set the stool down and drew out a folded lyric sheet from inside her coat. She began to sing. The voice was low at first, tender, sad, but threaded with determination. Jonas closed his eyes and listened as the notes drifted through the bars, warming the stale air, reshaping the silence around him. Each morning, like this, she sang outside his cell until the first rays of sun found him. Townfolk passed by, pausing to listen. Barmaid, blacksmith, a leather worker with calloused hands. Children halted their games to hear the voice, strange and beautiful in the cold light. A teenage boy urged his deaf younger sister forward. Lena took the child's small palm in hers and guided his fingers in the simple hand movements of her song. The child sang with trembling arms, tracking the notes with signs. The sister's muted smile was enough. Conversation picked up. Workmen lingered, listening. Shopkeepers asked Deputy Harris, "Whose girl is that singing every morning?" And Harris was forced to admit he didn't know, only that the voice calmed something in him. Jonas, behind the bars, sensed the change. It hurt him less now, knowing she stood for him. The deputies saw it too. They dropped their casual glances for sober attention. Presence redefined itself around him as her song grew daily, louder, braver. 9 days passed. The morning was cold and bright when a visiting woman appeared. Some described her as slight, dressed in mourning, hair streaked with silver but eyes hard and alert. She approached the steps with a small, leather-bound book tucked under her arm. People followed her quietly, curiosity and hope in their footsteps. In the hushed crowd, she lifted the book and cleared her throat. "I am Mrs. Greer," she announced in steady voice. "I used to serve in the Marrow household. I kneaded their dough. I served their guests. And I saw Mr. Clyde Marrow threaten a woman and heard him say she must disappear or else I would." She flipped the book open to reveal precise entries, dates, names, fear. Gasps swelled around the stone walls. The sheriff stepped forward again, brow furrowed. Mrs. Greer spoke louder. "He struck the girl on her head that night, I know, for I once washed her bloodied hair and silenced her forever, a deed never justified or confessed." Eyes turned to the jailhouse door. A silence fell heavier than any accusation. Then the deputies unlocked Jonas's cell and helped him out. He stood firm and tall, but when he saw Lena waiting for him, her face hopeful in the dawn light, the resolve in his chest melted into relief. The crowd of townspeople parted as he stepped down the cold stairs into the street. No one laughed anymore. No one called him mad, only whispered thanks, apologies, as though they helped build a bridge between isolation and compassion. Lena was among them, standing with the deaf girl who had mimicked her morning songs. The child ran forward, arms open. Jonas knelt to lift her into his calloused hands. She placed a folded paper into his palm, the lyrics she had taught the child. She watched him smile. The townsfolk pressed around, murmuring among themselves. A few mothers wiped their eyes. A man in a long coat gripped his hat, tears in the corners of his eyes. Jonas rose, holding the girl and the paper. He looked down at Lena. She met his gaze, chin lifted, eyes shining. They didn't need to speak. That morning, at the edge of the jailhouse square, a silent promise, made in song, had rewritten their world. The spring festival unfolded under a sky of cerulean blue, the town square decked in bunting and blooms. Colorful ribbons fluttered overhead, and stalls lined the dusty path, offering fresh pies, tumbling ribbons, and handcrafted wares. Children scampered between adults, their laughter bubbling over the crackle of banjos and fiddles. It was a day of rebirth, of renewal, and today it held deeper meaning for Cold Hollow. Jonas Holt walked through the throng, chin lifted as townspeople bowed in acknowledgement, or at least out of courtesy. The weight of his ordeal no longer bore heavy on his shoulders. It was replaced with a quiet dignity. At the center of the square stood a simple wooden stage adorned with wildflowers. That was where Lena Marrow stood, tall and small, in a light dress that shifted with every breeze. Her voice was intentionally soft. The crowd hushed, drawn by a hush deeper than curiosity. She lifted her eyes and met theirs, the blacksmith, the storekeeper, the children with flower-dusted shirts. Hearts still trembled, ears still remembered that first courtroom song. She inhaled. "I never wanted to be heard," she began, voice hushed but steady. "I only wanted not to be hurt." A murmur coursed through the crowd. It was the first time she spoke beyond a whisper. The words cleared as she continued. "My silence was a shield, made of fear and of pain, but silence has never been my prison. Music is." She paused, letting her confession resonate in the air. She paused. Then she spoke again, softer still. "Jonas helped me believe that words can be safe, too." Across the square, Jonas watched with awe. The winds of the woods seemed to gather to carry her voice. He recognized those words not as fragile, but as bold flowers growing through frozen ground. He stepped forward and approached the stage. When he reached the edge, he knelt, offering his hand without fanfare. The crowd fell silent, drawn not by spectacle but by mutual understanding. He spoke for the first time that day, his voice warm like thawing snow. "You don't owe me a word, just your truth." And in that moment, the world held its breath. Lena reached back, her fingers closing around his as she descended the stage. She smiled, quietly, fully, at last free to be seen, to be heard, to be herself. "Then let's walk together." A gentle cheer rose, swelling into applause. Families stepped aside, children reached up for ribbons, and the musicians found their tune again. But now the melody shifted toward something hopeful. A young girl in the crowd, deaf and bright-eyed, signed to her mother. She said words. Jonas and Lena walked slowly down the main street. Each step was guided by trust, each glance by gratitude. The blacksmith offered a respectful nod. The storekeeper gave Jonas a firm handshake. An old woman stepped forward and laid a wreath of daisies in Lena's hair. She whispered, "Welcome home, dear." They passed under ribbons that shimmered like promise. The bells of the little church rang in the distance, mingling with laughter, music, and the rustle of spring breeze. And as the townspeople watched them go, they felt something change. Not just a couple's first steps together, but something larger. The first beating heart of a community, opened by forgiveness, trust, and the courage to speak. Jonas and Lena did not speak again on the threshold of the festival gates. They did not need to. Their hands were linked, their steps converged, and above them the sky opened wide, welcoming the promise of a future shaped not by isolation, but by shared words, shared dreams, and a love that had found its voice. A year had passed since the morning Lena was found at the Fencepost, and Jonas Holt's cabin had come alive with color and sound. Wildflowers lined the walkway, their petals reaching for the sun. Above the front door, a hand-carved sign swung gently in the breeze. Jonas and Lena's place, no more silence, just music. Each day, children from Cold Hollow gathered in the yard. Lena knelt among them, guiding their small hands through movements that shaped invisible melodies. Most of them had never heard a note with their ears, but with Lena, they felt every rhythm in their bones. Her fingers moved like music made visible. Jonas, no longer burdened by grief, whistled on his way to the woods. He worked steadily, chopping wood in rhythm with the new peace in his chest. Once, He had been a man trapped in memory. Now, the laughter echoing from his home brought him back with every swing of his axe. That afternoon, townsfolk filled the porch for a quiet celebration. Mrs. Greer came with her apron still dusted with flour. The children's parents stood nearby, watching with awe as their sons and daughters signed along to a fiddle's tune. Lena smiled as she watched them, her presence calm and grounded. At the edge of the gathering, Jonas sat on a step with a plank of cedar between his knees. He carved the words, "Again," simple and true. Jonas and Lena's place. No more silence, just music. He drove it into the soil by the garden she had planted herself, then stepped back to admire the view, the porch full of people, the air full of songs seen, not heard. Lena walked to him and rested her head on his shoulder. No words passed between them. They didn't need any. The wind and the wood and the watching eyes all understood what had taken root here. As twilight softened the sky, the porch doors opened, and the gathering formed a quiet circle. Lena stepped into its center. She raised her hand, took a breath, and began to sing. It was "No Cage for My Wings," the song she had sung in court that changed everything. But now her voice rang with strength, not fear. She sang for joy, not justice. Children clapped in their own rhythm, lanterns glowed. The town listened, not just with ears, but hearts. When the last note faded, Jonas stepped forward, knelt, and slid a silver band onto her finger. She placed one on his, their hands trembling, steadied together. Lena turned to the crowd, lips moving now with ease. "Let's walk together." They did. Down the path, past the swing set Jonas had built, toward a life they had carved with courage. In that moment, hands entwined, hearts unguarded, Cold Hollow knew this was no longer a house in the woods. It was a home. If this story touched your heart, of a man broken by loss and a woman silenced by fear, then you know love can still bloom in the most unlikely places. For more tales of quiet bravery and unexpected devotion, subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. Leave a like if you believe kindness can change a life, and tell us in the comments, would you have untied her? Until next time, ride steady, love deeply.